Hello, I'm Susan Cupper, Enterprise's Subrecipient Auditor. Welcome to the tutorial on subrecipient risk assessment for federal funding. You're viewing this tutorial because your organization is applying for federal funds from Enterprise. Most likely, you're applying for Section 4 capacity building funds. This is money that Enterprise receives from the Department of Housing and Urban Development and passes on to our grantees. Before awarding federal funds, Enterprise is required to perform a risk assessment of each organization that applies. Beginning in 2015, the Federal Office of Management and Budget issued new regulations called the Uniform Guidance for Federal Awards. This document required organizations like Enterprise to perform a pre-award risk assessment of each applicant for federal funds to determine if the applicant is capable of properly managing these funds and complying with federal regulations and with their grant agreements. We have to assure that your organization has adequate written policies and procedures and documents that meet federal criteria. Completion of this risk assessment is one of the final steps in the application process for federal funds. The materials that you need to submit for the risk assessment depend upon whether you are a new applicant or a previous applicant. A new applicant has either never applied for federal funds from Enterprise or applied before 2015. A previous applicant applied for federal funds from Enterprise in 2015 or more recently. If you are a new applicant, you complete a full questionnaire, provide copies of all the documents requested in the questionnaire, and provide a copy of your most recent audited financial statement. If you're a previous applicant, you complete a brief questionnaire which asks if there have been any significant changes in your organization within the past year that might affect your ability to administer federal funds, and asks you to provide a copy of your most recent audited financial statement. Whether you are a new or previous applicant, when you respond to the RFP, Enterprise provides you a link to the appropriate questionnaire. You can also find the questionnaires on the Enterprise Resource Center. The remainder of the slides and my narrative discuss the items that are required on the full questionnaire in the order that they appear. They are listed on the slide that you see here, headed Questionnaire Topics. I'll give you general guidelines for each one, explaining the minimum information that they should contain. Since every organization is a little different, your own materials may vary somewhat in format and content. The questionnaire begins with some yes or no questions about your organization and its previous federal funding. This is followed by questions about various policies and procedures that your organization should have, and a request for you to submit a copy of each one. First, our financial management and accounting procedures. Most organizations have a manual that describes their financial and accounting operations, and generally, this is adequate to submit. Enterprise just wants to see that you have procedures for basic financial functions and that you have controls to see that they are followed. At a minimum, your materials should include procedures for handling cash and checks, preparing bank reconciliations, and handling accounts payable and accounts receivable. Make it clear that you have separation of duties so that the same person, for example, is not making bank deposits and performing bank reconciliations. Also, please show evidence that when you receive grant funds, you will keep a separate record of how the funds are spent, probably in a separate general ledger account. Next, our procurement and contracting policies and procedures. This just means your procedures for choosing consultants and other services and for purchasing equipment and supplies. Sometimes this material might be part of your financial manual. It should include the procurement methods that you use, for example, phone quotations of price, RFPs, or sealed bids. Also, describe your method of price or cost analysis. And make sure that you require full and open competition in procurement. That means that you don't use the same contractors all the time, but open your RFPs or bids to a variety of applicants. Personnel policies and procedures will be in your organization's employee or personnel manual. At a minimum, these should include statements that the organization complies with federal regulations such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, Age Discrimination Act, and Americans with Disabilities Act. You should have a conflict of interest policy, procedures for employee hiring and performance assessments, and a listing of employee benefits. The next section of the questionnaire asks you about different aspects of internal controls and requests samples of some documents. The first of these is the timesheet. This probably causes more confusion than any other document. However, it's pretty simple. If you receive federal funds, you must have a timekeeping system for employees. The timesheet or time card may be electronic or paper, but it should include all of an employee's time for the pay period, and it must show separately the time he or she spent on the federal award. If you're not sure if your timesheet meets these criteria, take a look at the sample timesheet on the Enterprise Resource Center. Your timesheet may look quite different from this one, particularly if you have an electronic timekeeping system. An organization may show grant-related activity with a variety of names: grant number, project, department, or something else. The terminology is not important as long as the grant-related time is shown separately. A consultant or contractor agreement might have different formats depending upon the nature of the product or services. However, Enterprise only requires that you include some basic items. These are listed on the slide: the names of both parties, the period of service, both beginning and end, the scope of services, the payment rate and method, the responsibilities and deliverables of both parties, and signatures of both parties and when they sign. A copy of an expense report is also required. There is no standard format for this. It will depend on the needs of your organization and the extent of your employees' travel. Just make sure it contains the information shown on the slide. Specifically, the expenses should be itemized and show the business purpose. The form should indicate that receipts are required, and the form should have spaces for the employee to sign and the supervisor to approve. As you can see on the risk assessment questionnaire, we also ask about two other items. One is policies for training and professional development. These are not required, but please submit them if you have them. The other is your organization's indirect cost rate. If you have a letter with a federally approved indirect cost rate, send a copy of it. If you do not, and if you want to charge indirect costs to your grant, you may charge a flat rate of 10% of modified total direct costs. When you're preparing your budget, your Enterprise Grant Specialist can help you with this. Finally, all applicants must submit a copy of the organization's most recent audited financial statement. There has occasionally been some confusion as to what these are. They are the most recent audits of the organization's financial statements performed by a CPA or by an audit firm. They provide an objective view of your financial position. They are not a monthly or quarterly statement of account balances prepared by your own financial staff. If the auditors had any findings, you have probably prepared a corrective action plan. If this is not already included in the audit, please send a copy of the plan. If your organization expended over $750,000 in federal funds in your past fiscal year, the auditors should have performed a single audit along with their audit of the financial statement. If there were findings and you prepared a corrective action plan, this will be in the single audit, following the findings and questions cost section. If you didn't have a single audit, please send a list of your expenditures of federal funds, if any, during the year of the audit. List the source of the funds, for example, HUD, the program, for example, CDBG, and the amount of each one. Okay, after you've completed the questionnaire and submitted it along with the documentation, what happens next? Enterprise will perform your risk assessment while all your other proposal materials are being reviewed. If any risk assessment items are missing, or if Enterprise needs more information, we will email you an assessment findings letter telling you what to do next. After all this work you've done, how does completion of the risk assessment benefit you as a grantee? First, you'll know that your record keeping for the grant will be basically compliant with federal regulations. Of course, Enterprise expects that you will use the materials that you have submitted. Also, if you're required to include documentation when you submit a disbursement request for the grant, or if Enterprise chooses your grant for a subrecipient review in the future, you'll be better prepared and the process will take less time. I hope that this tutorial has been useful to you in preparing your risk assessment material. Once completed, it will be another step on your way to getting a federal grant from Enterprise. If you want to, you can download these slides through the Enterprise Resource Center. If you have any questions, please see this last slide for help. Thanks for listening.